Welcome to Healthier Together, Larimer County's public health podcast, where we come together for healthier lives, connected communities, and real conversations. From your local public health team, I'm your host, Tom.
And I'm Joanna. This is your weekly minisode where we'll provide a brief update on local public health news. Today, we're joined by Emily Francis, Mayor of the City of Fort Collins, and Drew Brooks, Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Transportation Services for Fort Collins. Thank you both for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
So in early March, Fort Collins City Council adopted 5 major priorities for its 2026 to 2028 term. Can you give us a brief overview of those 5 priorities?
Sure. So every 2 years after an election, City Council gets together and sets 2-year priorities. This year we have 5 priorities, which is great and focused. Instead of previously, we've had anywhere from 32 to 99 priorities. So I think we're making great progress on how to really focus. And, I think the main priority that came out was really focused on affordability. We have really heard from residents that affordability is probably the top issue that they are concerned about. And so council has a priority around promoting affordable and sustainable growth by making development more predictable, efficient, and cost effective. And this is looking at housing and also opening a business. What's the city's role in housing affordability? And what's the city's role in the ability for anyone to open a business in Fort Collins? And then on the other side of that affordability, we're really looking at how do we increase the number of livable wage jobs that are in Fort Collins. And so this priority is called Bolster Economic Vitality with a focus on neighborhood centers and quality job creation. And so we're really looking at how do we have employers that are paying livable wages and how are we revitalizing neighborhood centers? I think of neighborhood centers as more of like the corner locations near your home. For me, that's Taft and Elizabeth. It has a grocery store, it may have some other few amenities, but may not have been updated for a very long time or may not seen kind of the activity that we want to see. And so really focusing on what is the city's role in revitalizing those neighborhood centers. As some people may know, we at the city, like many local governments and the state, are facing some budget issues. And so council really wants to make sure that as a city organization, we're ensuring long-term financial sustainability. So really looking at things like levels of service, what programming we're offering, and how are we going to maintain that as we continue to grow and as we're offering services for residents. Then we have one, connect community to council actions. This one's harder to explain, but residents really want to understand how does someone go through a policy and make a decision at the end instead of just knowing kind of what happened at the end. So we're really trying to connect more with residents on what is the process as a decision maker, as somebody who serves on council or as mayor, that goes into how we get to adopting something. Because by the time it goes to council, it's usually been through multiple work sessions, it's had many discussions, but residents usually just see it going straight to council. And so shedding some more light on how decisions are made. And then the last one, which we're here to talk about today, is accelerate progress towards Vision Zero. Vision Zero is trying to get to 0 serious injuries or fatalities.
So what does the current data tell us about transportation-related deaths and injuries in Fort Collins?
From 2021 through 2025, 40 families lost loved ones in traffic crashes, and 358 people experienced life-changing injuries in traffic crashes. So it's not a small number, and we want that number to be decreasing.
Well, most of our severe crashes are on arterial roads. So those are at higher speeds. They're almost always at intersections and involve someone turning left or right. So those left and right turning movements are typically where those very severe crashes happen. People riding motorcycles or bicycles and people walking are especially vulnerable. In the last few years, we've actually had a very high number of motorcycle fatalities. Only about 7% of all crashes involve a vulnerable road user, so someone who is not in a vehicle. But those are 50% of severe crashes.
And how is all of that data collected?
It's a variety of means. Usually it comes from on the ground police reporting. Whenever there is a severe crash, there is a team that goes out. And that's why in those severe crashes, you'll often see an intersection closed down for a significant amount of time because they do a very thorough investigation, and report on all of those different factors. And then our traffic team takes all of that data from their systems, analyzes it, and puts it into a variety of different systems.
What do the trends in that data look like over time? Are we getting closer to reaching the goal of zero deaths and injuries by 2032?
So the good news is that we have had fewer deaths and traffic crashes for the past 2 years. We've had a 54% reduction in 2025 compared to 2023. So far in 2026, we have had no deaths. We've had about 20% fewer serious injuries in traffic crashes in 2025 compared to 2024. And there are, of course, regional factors that we can't always control, but we have to kind of get ahead of. There's obviously a lot of folks that live outside of Fort Collins that move in, that are in coming into Fort Collins. So there's just a lot of regional issues that kind of come with this type of, as we increase our traffic, especially if you think about like kind of like that Harmony corridor where we have a significant amount of traffic coming in and out of each day.
How does Vision Zero go about preventing traffic deaths and injuries? What sorts of tools or interventions do you use?
Yeah, well, we're trying to look at it from what we would refer to as like as kind of a systems approach, how we design intersections and retrofit intersections. So if you think about like what's going on College and Trinity right now, that was one of our worst intersections. Right now, it's probably not one of our worst because most people can't get through it because of the construction that we're doing there. But we're improving turning movements and turn lanes and all the different access of that particular intersection, creating all of the signals so they have the most current technology so they can control traffic better and allow for different turning movements. Also, obviously, our police department is using red light cameras and speed cameras to kind of see if we can slow traffic down. And then, of course, longer term solutions are around creating a culture of traffic safety in our community, which is probably the harder thing to do. Talking about kind of cultural behavioral change, making sure that people know that it's just not okay to run a traffic light or to speed. Of course, kind of having people trained to habitually watch out for people walking and biking, those vulnerable road users.
I think, Drew, I'll also add that, city council, when we were talking about Vision Zero, we're really talking about the built environment of the roads in Fort Collins, and the grid-like structure and the wide lanes really encourage or speeding. And we know that that leads to serious injuries and fatalities. So really looking at how do we better design streets to naturally slow down speeds? And then also how do we better align speed limits with the different areas in town. So some areas probably have too high speed limits. There have been residents who really want us to lower speed limits in neighborhoods. And we've seen other communities do that. And so the red lights is like a great example of, you have to be going 11 over to get a ticket. And so that's quite a bit over the speed limit. And I know that some residents are upset that we have red light tickets, but that's going quite a bit over the speed limit. And so we felt is pretty fair, and it has reduced speeding in our town. So, these are some of the things we're looking at, but then also how do we just make it more difficult to speed so we can naturally calm traffic?
A lot of our roadways in Fort Collins are quite wide, and for a driver, person in a vehicle, the speed feels like it should be faster, right? And so what we will need to do in some of these corridors is actually narrow those lanes and add sort of what we refer to as like visual friction, right? So when you have more of that visual friction, it feels like you need to drive slower. Because even with speed limits in place, often people speed over the speed limit because they feel comfortable driving at a certain speed. And so we have to kind of change the landscape of literally the landscape of those roadways so that they feel and appear like you need to slow down.
Are there other places, either here in the US or throughout the world, that are doing this really well that we look to for ideas?
There are some cities that are doing really well. Kind of the poster child in the United States is Hoboken, New Jersey. They have had zero fatalities for several years. Now, let's bear in mind too that Hoboken is like 2 square miles. It's a very small city geographically. For reference, Fort Collins is 57 square miles. So it's a much and Hoboken is also, I think, about 60,000 population. Now, where you can point to great success there is that 55% of Hobokens, they commute on public transit. And so that is one of the biggest factors is like if we can get mode shift, if we can get folks out of vehicles and into a safer mode of transportation, you're going to see great success there. There are some other areas like I think Carmel, Indiana, is actually one that's doing really really well. And of course, internationally, there are many cities that have done pretty well there. We do regular tours with Boulder back and forth because we kind of view them as doing pretty good in this space, and we kind of go back and forth and look at what they're doing, and they look at what we're doing, and we're also members of NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. In fact, their conference is coming up here in May, and we'll have probably a dozen of our staff that go to that because it's one of the premier U.S. organizations that's doing work in this space.
Part of Vision Zero focuses on the high injury network, which is made up of just 8% of roads in Fort Collins that account for 63% of serious crashes. Can you tell us a little bit more about those areas and what contributes to that disproportionate percentage of incidents?
That high injury network is mostly those arterial roads we were talking about earlier that have it's easier to speed, they're wider roads, they have higher speed limits. They're usually near other amenities like retail, convenience stores, entertainment, those types of things. So they have more interaction between vulnerable road users and cars. And so that's why we see a higher level of interactions there. And then also, when I was talking earlier about speed, and if the speed limits were appropriate, because if you're hit by a car that's going 20 miles per hour, 9 times out of 10, you're able to walk away from that accident. But if you're hit by someone traveling 40 miles per hour, that's really where we see those serious injuries and even death occur. And so, that's why we're really trying to look at these road diets of like shrinking the road, lowering speed limits, especially around areas where we have a high concentration of pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars.
The high injury network is a really interesting way to kind of look at this because it really has focused our attention to where those crashes are that are the most severe. And so that is kind of one of the ways that we have kind of focused in our work, really changed the way that we're taking a system wide approach to this.
So it sounds like it's a combination of both trying to reduce the number of incidents overall and also when incidents do happen, trying to make them less severe.
So the neighborhood traffic mitigation program is this collaborative process where neighbors can kind of petition to have something in their neighborhood when they feel like there's kind of speeding maybe out of control in their neighborhood, and so and they'll reach out to us. We'll do traffic studies and determine where the problems might lie. We'll often do, if you've seen those little trailers that have like the speed cameras on them that kind of let you know what your speed is going, we'll start there and put those in place so that we can kind of alert residents to just how fast they're going in their neighborhood. It's often interesting when people find out that just which neighbors are the ones doing the speeding, and so what we try to do is kind of inform everyone first and do a little work there. But if that doesn't work, then the neighbors can actually start a petition to get other types of measures put in place, such as speed bumps, raised crosswalks, curb extensions, which will kind of slow things down in those areas. And so it's a small program, but a mighty program that seems to be very very popular with many of our neighborhoods. Now, in our neighborhoods is not typically where we see those severe crashes because the speed limits are typically lower and people tend to not speed in their own neighborhoods. But if there's cut through traffic or something like from say a detour, that's something that we like to try and monitor through this program.
I'll say that speed bumps are a contentious issue within neighborhoods of residents being very divided over who
Very
wants speed bumps and who does not.
yeah. Speed bumps can be very divisive, and they're also can be a little difficult to maintain, especially in times when we have a lot of snowfall, which we didn't this last year. But when you do have a lot of snowfall, they're very difficult to maintain because the snowplows kind of tear them up pretty readily. So they aren't our first choice for trying to figure out how to control these problems, but they can be effective.
How does equity show up in Vision Zero and transportation planning more broadly?
So there's major goal areas, and one of those goal areas is focused on equity. And part of the way that we incorporate this is through the city's health equity index. And so prioritizing which projects we're submitting for state and federal funding or with our own city budget. And we're using that health equity index to kind of weigh the development of those high injury networks and really focus on those areas that we know need more support. Particularly, when you look at like the northwest part of the city, those areas of the city tend to have older infrastructure, things like smaller sidewalks, less of the new technology with lights and speed bumps and radar. And so really looking at how do we make sure that we're deploying this equitably and really focusing on where are we seeing those high rates of accidents, but also how are we addressing this as, we build out more and are those difference between the older neighborhoods and newer neighborhoods. And then when we do community engagement within Vision Zero, we really try to engage with residents that may have less safe access to transportation, things like mobile home parks or our affordable housing complexes, kids who attend Title I schools. So we're really trying to bring in perspective of different residents and how they interact with the system.
We have a study right now, which is our Safer Streets Northwest study, which is looking at kind of all of those neighborhoods in the Northwest. We're also doing a North College study, which is looking at all of the areas around College Avenue north of Vine Drive. And so those are areas where we know that we have a propensity of transit users, vulnerable road users, people who are walking and biking more out of necessity, more than just choice. And so we know that those are areas where we need to kind of focus our efforts because we'll see a higher propensity of folks who are in that kind of vulnerable road user category.
That's where the health department is. That makes a lot of sense. How does Fort Collins work with other government agencies to address transportation safety, especially where city infrastructure interacts with infrastructure that might be managed by a different agency? I'm thinking of like I-25, for example.
We're lucky to have good staff that are dedicated to managing this. Some of the organizations that we're a part of is the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is the NFRMPO. They really look at that regional perspective. And then we also, of course, work with the Colorado Department of Transportation, or CDOT.
Yeah, so we have monthly and quarterly meetings with CDOT on a variety of projects. One of those is the Mulberry interchange. That end of Mulberry is not in the city limits, but it is something that we're working with CDOT very, very closely because that is a location where there have been quite a few pedestrian fatalities over the years. Working on improving that intersection is a joint effort between the state, the city of Fort Collins, and the county as well. And then, of course, as you can imagine, College Avenue 287 is a state highway that runs right through the middle of Fort Collins. And so we have to work with them regularly on all of these projects. They are very dedicated as well. CDOT is to Vision Zero. So we're always looking for ways that we can kind of coordinate on these type of projects and make sure that we're providing a really good, safe road experience, no matter who owns the road.
You talked about this a little bit before, but could you expand on how multimodal transportation, things like walking, biking, public transportation, play into the Vision Zero strategy?
Those multimodal options play a huge role because the less cars you have, you're really reducing the incidence of fatalities and serious injuries. And so it's part how do we make roads safer for motor vehicles? But nearly all severe traffic accidents involve a motor vehicle. And so we're really trying to reduce the dependency on motor vehicles and making driving kind of the less convenient choice and really trying to promote the walking and biking, public transportation, as we know that these involve, if there is an incident, much less likely chance of it being severe or a fatality.
I'm a real transit nerd, and I love that space. And it's the safest mode of transportation on the road is transit, and so buses and trains obviously are the way to go. So the more folks that we can get into those modes of transportation, we just absolutely know that we're going to, reduce those interactions that could be unsafe. So mode shift is one of the primary goals.
Proactive community engagement is also listed as one of the guiding principles of Vision Zero. What does that community engagement look like, and how can residents get involved?
From council's perspective, that community engagement really shapes and helps us focus on where to prioritize and where are our highest incidence rates. And as Drew talked about earlier with the neighborhood program, of how residents can get like a speed bump put in their neighborhood, it's all based on community feedback. And so, since we are all in this together, we all have to work together to make Vision Zero a reality. That's where the engagement part really comes in, um, and really plays a big role. So it's not only, you know, residents telling us where they have issues, but it's also being a more aware driver, learning how to be a more aware biker or pedestrian. And so it takes all of us to get to Vision Zero. And, it's avoiding those distractions and not picking up your phone when you're driving or, making a full stop at a stop sign, not speeding.
3 years ago, when I took over the role that I'm in now, the traffic department and FC moves came under my purview, and I was absolutely stunned by the amount of engagement that we receive from our neighbors and community members on traffic issues and speeding issues. It might be argued that our traffic department might receive the most number of uh, engagement from the community because it's a very engaged population on this issue. Speeding is something and traffic safety is very top of mind. We have a very engaged community that wants to be able to bike and walk safely, and participate in all of those modes. And so we don't have to reach out to them quite as much as we would in some situations because they are letting us know, and we document all of those interactions. Some of those folks will contact us multiple times a year about a particular issue and check in and kind of see where we're going with that. Unfortunately, I think that is a change that we're going to have to make to be less reactive and more proactive in this space, and that has to do with a little bit of resourcing in certain departments. And so we're working right now to kind of do some releveling and do some different things within our traffic and our FC News space, so that we can do more engagement in this space, do more proactive work in neighborhoods, so that we aren't waiting to kind of hear we have to wait. But you know what I'm saying is like we don't want to wait for that to come to us. We should be out there being more proactive in that area. So there's a lot of engagement that goes on a kind of a daily basis. We're literally going out on the street doing those traffic counts and engaging with our community members to talk through these issues kind of on the street. And then also there's you may have seen those bumper stickers around sound down for the slow the FOCO down, right? That's a an engagement campaign that the police department initiated, that is just trying to bring a little bit of levity and focus to this issue. And we probably need even more of that type of work so that we can get people engaged proactively, having discussions about it, and kind of just putting it in front of everyone's face every day, so that we're all paying attention and aware of this particular problem.
Is there anything that you wish more people knew about transportation safety?
Well, I would say that, it's like that old joke when people say they complain about traffic, that you are traffic, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? You are the problem, right? If you were speeding, if you're running red lights, if you're not paying attention, if you're not looking at some alternative modes of transportation. And obviously we know that not everyone can use an alternative mode. But we're not always necessarily telling you that you have to get up your car, but maybe try to do some different things every day, because we all kind of contribute to this problem. And so if we can kind of figure out ways to all be a little more aware, pay attention to those things, I would love for people to know that more, that they do have a voice, they do have an action that they can take. That it's not just about a bunch of engineers trying to figure out the problem.
Yeah, I think I would just add that, if you're driving a car, it can wait. Whatever you think you need to attend to, it can wait. As we see serious injuries and fatalities, at the levels they are in Fort Collins, it is quite concerning. And we really do want people to pay attention to the road, not be distracted, follow the traffic laws. don't speed. And so, if you really do need to take care of something, pull over, because I don't think anyone leaves their house, gets in their car, and thinks they're going to be the one who causes a serious injury and fatality. But if you're distracted and or you're speeding, that greatly increases the chances. So I just always say it can wait.
And then if people would like to learn more about Vision Zero, where should they go?
So if you just go to fortcollins.gov and you type in traffic safety, it's going to take you directly to all of the information that you want to know about Vision Zero, everything about our traffic safety programs, the neighborhood traffic mitigation program, all of those things that we've talked about today and have housed in that one traffic safety webpage.
Well, thank you both so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Do you have a question about public health in Larimer County or a topic you'd like us to discuss? Let us know. Email us at healthiertogether@larimer.org. Thanks for listening, Larimer County.
Until next week, stay well, stay connected, and remember, we really are healthier together.